My daughter-in-law pushed my wife into the mud in the middle of the wedding reception, 2 minutes and 47 seconds after she swore to love and respect this family. 200 guests witnessed it. 200 pairs of eyes watched the woman who had been a mother for 33 years collapse into a flower bed, and not one person moved. Not one person said a word. The entire garden went silent in a way that felt wrong. Then a laugh cut through the air. I turned around. It was my son, the groom, handsome and polished on the most important day of his life. He was standing right next to the woman who had just pushed his mother to the ground, and he was laughing. Not out of awkwardness, not because he didn't know how to react, but a real laugh, easy, relaxed, the kind you make when something strikes you as genuinely funny. Something inside me died in that moment. I looked down, one ivory heel lying alone in the mud. A few steps away, my wife was still on the ground. The dress she had spent over 2 months searching for, driving to different cities just to try it on, just to get it right, was now soaked through with dark mud from the shoulder all the way down to the hem. I still remember the way she spun once in front of the mirror the day she finally found it. She smiled and looked at me and asked, "Do you think it looks good on me?" I told her she was the most beautiful woman in the room. And now, on her own son's wedding day, that same woman was being humiliated in front of 200 people. The worst part wasn't the fall. It wasn't the laughter from the guests. It wasn't the pitying looks. It was the truth that had just hit me like a wall. My son wasn't surprised. He didn't run to help her up, didn't ask if she was okay, didn't show a single moment of anger toward his wife, because he already knew this was going to happen. My name is Thomas Whitaker. And that afternoon, at the most expensive wedding my family had ever held, I realized that the person who had betrayed us wasn't the bride. It was the son I had spent my entire life loving. But even that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what happened 30 seconds later. What turned the whole wedding into a disaster no one in that room will ever forget. I want to stop here for a moment. Because before I tell you what I did next, I need you to understand something about who I am. I am not a man who makes scenes. I built a business from nothing, 40 years in commercial real estate, and I learned early that the men who lose their temper in public lose everything else shortly after. I have held my tongue at board meetings when I was being lied to directly. I have shaken hands with people I despised. I have absorbed damage quietly because I believed that was what strength looked like. I believed that for a very long time. I was wrong. My daughter Claire was already moving toward Maggie. That's my wife Margaret, but she's been Maggie to me for 31 years. Claire was in a pale gold bridesmaid dress, cutting through the crowd with the focused urgency of someone who grew up watching her mother be the last person anyone thought to protect. She was 20 feet away. It was going to take her a few seconds to get there. And in those seconds I looked at my son Nathan one more time. Nathan, 33 years old. My firstborn. The child I stayed up through long nights with when he had a fever at 2 years old. The child I drove 4 hours to watch play in a college soccer tournament he didn't even start in, because I wanted him to look up from the bench and know someone was there. He was standing with his arm around Victoria's waist now, his head slightly dipped toward hers, and whatever he had just said had made her press her lips together like she was trying to hold in a smile. Not guilt, not horror. Something that looked dangerously close to satisfaction. That's when I started walking. Not toward Maggie. Claire had that. I walked toward the bandstand at the edge of the garden, where the quartet had just noticed that something was wrong and slowed to a confused half-tempo. The bandleader was a man in his 50s, silver-haired, holding a wireless microphone and a set list. He saw me coming and his expression shifted from professional calm to something else. I pointed at the microphone. He handed it over without a single question. I will always be grateful for that. I walked to the center of the terrace. The flagstones were still warm from the August heat. The light had gone golden over the tree line at the edge of the Harrington Estate grounds, the kind of late afternoon light that the photographer Amanda Cole, who I had paid $6,000 to capture this day, was supposed to be using for the golden hour portraits right now. I could see the floral centerpieces on every table, white peonies and garden roses. I had approved the invoice. I could see the ice sculpture near the bar losing its shape in the Tennessee heat. I could see 200 faces turning toward me as I tapped the microphone once, and the sound rang out across the garden. The quartet stopped completely. Every conversation died. I looked at Nathan first. I watched his expression change from relaxed to wary in the space of one breath. I looked at Victoria. Her face was doing something careful and calculated, the face of someone rapidly assessing a situation they had not planned for. I looked at Richard Holt, Victoria's father, and watched him set down his champagne glass very slowly. Then I looked at everyone else. Thank you all for being here today. My voice was steady. My hands were not. Maggie and I will be leaving now. We won't be staying for dinner. I paused. Let it sit in the air over the garden, over the 200 people who had just watched my wife be pushed to the ground. And I want everyone here to know something. I will not be part of cruelty. Not today. Not ever. I handed the microphone back to the band leader. The garden was completely silent. I crossed the terrace to where Claire was kneeling next to Maggie. She had gotten most of the mud off Maggie's arms, but the dress was ruined and all three of us knew it. Maggie's face was turned slightly away from the crowd, tears running quietly down her face. Not sobbing, just continuous and silent, like water that has run out of places to go. I took her hand. We're leaving, I said. She nodded. Just that. Claire looked up at me. I'll help her to the car, Dad. I've got her, I said. We walked toward the parking lot slowly, because Maggie's other shoe was still somewhere in the flower bed, and she was barefoot. I matched her pace. Behind us, I heard Nathan call out, Dad, wait. I did not wait. I did not turn around. I kept walking. In the car, Maggie finally spoke. Her voice was very small. She pushed me, Thomas. She put both hands on my shoulders and shoved me. Hard. I know. Why would she do that? I helped Maggie into the passenger seat. Her dress left mud across the leather. I did not care. I closed her door, walked around, got in, started the engine. The air conditioning came on too cold, and neither of us moved to adjust it. Why would she do that? Maggie asked again. I knew why. I had known for most of a year and had refused to say it out loud, even to myself. I need to tell you something about Victoria before this story goes any further, because she is not a villain in the simple sense. And the stories that last, the ones people share, the ones that stay with you, they are never about simple villains. Victoria is a woman who came into this engagement carrying a fear so large she had built her entire personality around defending against it. She was terrified of being made secondary, of being the supporting character in someone else's story on the day designed entirely for her. She had decided, somewhere in the 18 months leading up to this wedding, that Maggie was the threat. She had constructed a narrative about being overshadowed, and she had rehearsed it so many times it had become the only story she could see. During the cocktail hour, someone had asked Maggie where Nathan was. Maggie said he and Victoria were taking portraits by the fountain. 3 seconds. A completely neutral answer. And Victoria, already wound tight from a full day of managing her own internal story, heard it as confirmation. Proof that Maggie was inserting herself, centering herself, stealing something. That was the match. 18 months of small escalations had been leading here, talking over Maggie at family dinners, correcting her in front of other people about her opinions, her cooking, her sense of style. Last Christmas, Victoria told Maggie her decorating was outdated. At the engagement party, Maggie had been seated at a table away from the immediate family. A logistics issue, Victoria said. Nathan backed her up. 4 months before the wedding, in front of Maggie, Victoria told Nathan that once they were married, things were going to be different around here. Maggie told me about it that same night. I said it was probably just the pressure of planning a big event. Brides wanting control. Pre-wedding nerves. Normal. I was wrong, and I have to carry that. I drove us to the Hermitage downtown. A couple in the parking garage stared at Maggie's ruined dress and said nothing. I walked her through the lobby. The front desk clerk kept her eyes professional. We took the elevator up in silence. In the room, Maggie went straight to the bathroom. I heard the shower start. I sat on the edge of the bed. My hands were shaking, not dramatically, just enough that I had to set my phone down on the nightstand and take a breath before I could use it. Then I opened my banking app. I navigated to the account I set up 6 years ago. The quiet account. The one I had been using to support Nathan's life without making it feel like charity. Because he is proud, and I love him, and I did not want money to carry weight between us. Over 6 years, the total had passed $200,000. Car repairs that became gifts. Credit card balances paid off during the slow stretches between promotions. 3 rounds of what I called investment advice. That was really just me writing checks so he didn't have to ask. And then the house $68,000 sitting in escrow right now, scheduled to transfer Monday morning for a closing he and Victoria had on Friday. I had insisted on signing all the vendor contracts personally. Cleaner for the accounting, I told Nathan. He agreed without thinking too hard about what that meant. He didn't realize those signatures made me the client of record, that I held the authority to cancel everything I had paid for. I also had the education account. $52,000 set aside 2 years ago when Nathan mentioned they were thinking about starting a family. Money for grandchildren who did not exist yet. I had been building something for people who had not been born. And I sat there on the edge of that hotel bed with Maggie in the shower, and I thought about Victoria's face when she walked away from what she had done. Not horrified, not conflicted, already moving. Already deciding that what had just happened was going to be someone else's problem. I made 4 phone calls. Gerald, my financial advisor, picked up on the second ring. He sounded surprised I was calling on a Saturday evening. "Gerald," I said, "I need you to halt a transfer scheduled for Monday morning. $68,000 from the secondary account to Nathan and Victoria Whitaker for a house closing on Friday. Cancel it." Silence. Then, "Thomas, are you sure? That will kill their closing." "I'm completely sure." He was typing before I finished. "Done. They'll hear from escrow Monday morning." Second call. Amanda Cole, the photographer. "Amanda, this is Thomas Whitaker. I am the client of record on your contract for today's wedding. I need you to stop working on those images. You are not authorized to deliver any photos to Nathan or Victoria." She told me Victoria had already sent her 3 messages asking about proofs. "Read the contract, Amanda. My name is on the client line. Nothing gets delivered." She was still talking when I hung up. Third call. The florist. Same conversation. He was angrier than Amanda. I told him to read the contract. Fourth call. The hotel where I had arranged the honeymoon suite upgrade as a surprise 2 months ago. I canceled it. Their reservation reverted to the standard room Nathan had booked on his own card. Then I called the rehearsal dinner venue and told them to keep the partial refund they owed me. I did not want it. 55 minutes. All of it gone. When Maggie came out of the bathroom in the hotel robe, her hair wet, her eyes red and swollen at the edges, she sat beside me and looked at the phone in my hands. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Taking back what I paid for," I said. She asked me to tell her everything. I did. All of it. The down payment, the photographer, the florist, the suite upgrade. When I finished, she was crying again, quietly. "They're going to lose the house, Thomas." "I know. Nathan is going to think you're punishing him." "Maybe. But Maggie, she pushed you into the dirt and laughed. I am not going to keep funding someone who thinks that is acceptable. Not with $1 more. If you have ever watched someone you love be deliberately humiliated in public, not just hurt by accident, but reduced on purpose, pushed down in front of 200 people who all chose to look away, then you understand why I felt no hesitation at all. And if you've ever had the quiet, particular grief of realizing you saw something coming and talked yourself out of acting on it, you understand what was underneath the anger that night. It wasn't just rage. It was the specific grief of a man who had excused too many small things for too long, and who was now looking at the sum total of all those excuses lying in the mud in a ruined dress. Sunday morning, Claire called at 8. "Dad, what happened after you left?" "Everything came apart at the seams. Nathan's been calling me every hour since the reception ended. He sounds scared." "He'll understand on Monday morning," I said. "What does that mean, Dad? What did you do?" "I stopped funding cruelty." "That's not an answer. It's the only one I have right now." Monday at 7:51, Nathan called. I let it ring. He called again. I declined. Third time I answered. "Dad, the escrow company just called me. The transfer didn't come through. I canceled it." "Why?" "Because I am not buying a home for someone who assaulted your mother." Silence. Then, "Dad, she didn't mean it as an assault. She was emotional. The whole day was stressful. She and Mom had been having a difficult afternoon." "About what?" He hesitated. "She felt like Mom was too present. Too involved in things that weren't hers to be involved in. So she shoved her into the mud. It wasn't like that, Nathan. I was standing across that garden. I watched Victoria put both hands on your mother's shoulders and push her. I watched Maggie go down. And then I watched you put your arm around your wife and make her laugh. A long silence. I was trying to calm Victoria down. I was trying to de-escalate, Dad, we close on Friday. We lose the house if the funds don't come through. We lose the earnest money. Everything. You should have thought about that before you chose your wife's comfort over your mother's dignity. I didn't laugh, Dad. I didn't say you laughed. I said you made her laugh. He didn't answer. I hung up. I want to be honest with you about something. I do not know with complete certainty what I would have done if I had been standing in Nathan's position. Shock is a real thing. The paralysis of watching someone you love do something irreversible in a public place that is real. I'd like to believe I would have moved immediately, but I also know that the people we are closest to are capable of confusing us beyond the reach of instinct. What I do know is this: watching it happen, and then choosing your wife's emotional state over your mother's physical dignity, that is a choice, not an accident, a choice. And Nathan made that choice in front of 200 people. Victoria's message arrived that afternoon. A text, carefully worded. Thomas, I believe there may have been a serious misunderstanding today, and I'd like to speak when you're ready. What happened with Margaret was not intentional, and I'm sorry if she was hurt. I read it twice. The architecture of it was almost impressive. Not intentional. Sorry if she was hurt. An apology designed to give her just enough cover to say she'd tried, while acknowledging absolutely nothing. I did not respond. An hour later, she called, and the careful text was gone. What the hell are you doing, Thomas? I'm withdrawing financial support. I already reached out to you. I already apologized. You apologized for nothing, Victoria. That's not an apology. That's a liability disclaimer. This is insane. You have contracts with vendors. Those contracts are with me as the client of record, not you. She hung up. Honestly, and I want to say this directly to you, because this is the part I have turned over in my mind more than any other. I spent that evening asking myself whether I had gone too far, whether the punishment exceeded the offense, whether a man who loves his son should absorb even this and find a path through. And the answer I kept arriving at was the same one. It was not about punishment. It was about refusing to be the man who writes a check while his wife is still washing the mud out of her hair. There is a word for what I would have been if I had transferred that money on Monday morning, and that word is complicit. Richard Holt called on Wednesday. Man to man, he said. Victoria had told him her side. Maggie had been difficult all day, overstepping, inserting herself. There had been an incident. Richard, I said, your daughter put both hands on my wife and shoved her to the ground. You were standing 40 feet away when it happened. He paused. I didn't see the full context. The context is irrelevant. You don't put your hands on someone and push them. Period. Martin, these kids are about to lose their home because you pulled the money. That's my daughter's future. Maybe she should have considered her future before she assaulted my wife. He called me vindictive. I told him there was a difference between vindictive and protective. He hung up. That same afternoon, Nathan showed up at the house unannounced. He was still wearing the clothes he'd had on the day before. Maybe he hadn't slept. Maybe he had, and it hadn't helped. I let him in. Maggie stayed in the kitchen. I could feel the silence of her listening from there. Nathan said, I'm not here about the money. I just need you to understand something. We sat in the living room. He said, Victoria isn't a bad person. She gets scared when she feels like she's losing control of something important to her. She had convinced herself all day that Mom was trying to take something from her. I knew she was getting worked up. I should have gotten her away from the reception earlier. I didn't. And then it happened and I froze, Dad. He looked at me directly. That's the truth. I froze. I knew it was wrong and I stood there. You whispered something to her. She laughed. I was trying to get her away from the crowd before she said something else. I wasn't making a joke. He paused. I know how it looked. It looked like you were choosing her. He nodded. I know. We sat in that for a moment. Then I said, You need to say that to your mother. He went into the kitchen. I stayed in the living room. I could hear their voices, low and careful. At some point, one of them was crying. When Nathan left an hour later, nothing was resolved. But something had shifted. 3 days after that, Victoria called Maggie directly. Maggie told me about it that evening. Her voice was completely flat. She called to apologize, Maggie said, but the apology was for my behavior. She said if I acknowledged my role in creating tension at the wedding, she could find it in herself to move forward. I opened my phone. Found the education account. $52,000 set aside for grandchildren who did not exist yet. I transferred it back to my main account. I did not tell Nathan. He would find out when he needed to know. Friday, Nathan called. The closing had fallen through. The sellers were keeping the earnest money. $14,000 gone. He and Victoria were going to have to move in with her parents. Dad, we are going to be living in her childhood bedroom because you decided to make a point. Nathan, I am not making a point. I am drawing a line. That's cruelty. What's cruel is pushing a 57-year-old woman into the dirt on her son's wedding day. What's cruel is your wife telling your mother to apologize for being pushed. Silence. I hung up. The following month passed like standing underwater. Nathan stopped calling. Victoria blocked both of us on every platform. Claire reported they were fighting constantly, the money, the move, the blame, the shame of it all. Then in July, Priya, Victoria's maid of honor, posted the video she had filmed at the wedding on her phone. The push, uploaded publicly with a caption that found it funny. It crossed 250,000 views in 36 hours. Half the comments were horrified. Half treated it as entertainment. Maggie saw it on her laptop in the kitchen one morning and closed it without a word. She just stood up and walked to the bedroom and shut the door quietly behind her. I already had the full video saved. I had pulled it from Priya's story the night of the wedding, before anything went anywhere. I called Nathan that evening and sent him the file. He called back 20 minutes later and didn't say anything at first. Watch her face when she walks away, I said. Not what you saw in front of you that night. What everyone else in that garden saw. He hung up without arguing, but he didn't call back to defend her either. This is what that story taught me. Money is not neutral. When you give quietly, with love, with no conditions, the giving itself is fine. The problem comes when you keep giving after the thing that needed to stop has already happened. Because continued giving becomes endorsement. It sends a message, not the one you intend, but the one that lands. And that message is, what happened here is acceptable. I had been sending that message for 18 months without understanding that I was sending it. The most important thing I can tell you, sitting here on the other side of all of this, is that generosity and permission are not the same thing. You can love someone completely and still refuse to fund the cruelty living inside their choices. In August, Claire told me Nathan and Victoria had started couples counseling. Victoria was blaming Nathan for failing to manage the financial situation. Nathan was blaming Victoria for creating it. It was not going well. In September, Maggie called Nathan on her own, without telling me first. She sat with him for over an hour. When she found me afterward, she had been crying, but her voice was steady. He says he's sorry, she said. He says he knew it was wrong at the wedding and he's been living with it since. He wants to be in our lives. She paused. He's stuck, Thomas. And if we force him to choose between us and his marriage, we might lose him in a way that doesn't come back. What are you suggesting? Tell him he's welcome here, that our relationship with him doesn't depend on what happens with her, that if the marriage ends, he doesn't have to start from zero with us. I thought about that for a long time. That's different from forgiving Victoria. Yes, she said. It is. She was right and I knew it. In October, Nathan and Victoria separated. She moved back to her parents' house. Nathan called Claire and asked if he could come over. I told Claire to tell him the door was open. He came the following weekend, thin, tired in the specific way of someone who had been arguing with himself for months and finally stopped. We sat in the living room. Maggie brought coffee without being asked and set a cup in front of him without any ceremony, the way she always had. Nathan said, "I'm sorry for all of it, for not defending Mom, for freezing, for every week after where I should have called and didn't." He looked at Maggie. "You deserve better at that wedding, and you deserved better from me in everything that came after." Maggie was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I forgave you a while ago, Nathan, but I need you to understand something. I spent months believing my son cared more about his wife's pride than his mother's dignity." He looked at his hands. "I know," he said. She said, "That's why we're here." We talked for nearly 3 hours. We didn't fix everything. We started. In November, Nathan filed for divorce. Victoria contested it. She wanted the wedding vendor costs reimbursed, alimony, a portion of Nathan's retirement account for a marriage that had lasted less than 10 months. In December, I went to the doctor for what I thought was a routine checkup. I came home with news I hadn't been expecting. Early-stage prostate cancer. Highly treatable, the doctor said. Excellent prognosis. Caught early. Maggie sat down on the edge of the bed and took both of my hands. Okay, she said. We deal with it. Together. I called Nathan that same evening. He drove over, without asking why, and stayed until well past midnight. We didn't talk about Victoria, or the wedding, or any of it. We talked about other things, old things, things I hadn't thought about in years. It was good. The next morning I sat Nathan down and told him I was updating my will. You're still in it, I said, but any inheritance goes into a protected trust, yours alone, shielded from any future marriage. He nodded. I said, I don't regret pulling that down payment. I don't regret any of the calls I made that night. He looked at me for a moment. I know, Dad, he said. If it had been me, I would have done the same thing. There is still distance between us, but we are standing on the same side of it now. In January, Victoria's attorney dropped the alimony demand. She just wanted it over. The divorce finalized in March. Nathan moved into a small apartment in East Nashville and started over at 33 years old. We have dinner together every week now, the three of us. We are rebuilding something that broke at a garden wedding in August in front of 200 people who all chose to look away except one. In April, Claire called to tell us she was pregnant. First grandchild. Maggie cried the full, open kind of crying she hadn't allowed herself since the wedding. Will you help with childcare? Claire asked. Every single day you need us, Maggie said. That night, lying in bed, Maggie asked me, do you think we did the right thing? I protected you, I said. That's the only measure I know. We lost time with Nathan. We lost time because he made a choice, and I refused to paper over it. But we didn't lose him. And I am grateful for that every morning I wake up. The wedding photos were never delivered. There is no official record of that day. Just 200 witnesses, and a marriage that lasted less than a year, and a choice I made in a hotel room on a Saturday night when my hands were shaking and my wife was in the shower, and I picked up the phone and started making calls. Sometimes I catch Maggie looking at her hands and I know exactly where she is. I know exactly what garden she has gone back to, and I will never regret stopping what I stopped, even on the days when it still hurts. Even on the days when I wonder what it would have looked like if I had just let it go. I couldn't. Because the man I want to be, the man I have spent 31 years trying to be for Maggie, that man doesn't write checks for people who push his wife into the mud and laugh. Before I go, I want to ask you something. Drop a 1-inch the comments if you think I made the right call that night, canceling everything, drawing the line. Drop a 2 if you think I should have waited and given them a chance to come to me first. Drop a 3 if you think I went too far and made things worse than they needed to be. I genuinely want to know where you land. And tell me where you're watching from, what city. What time is it there right now? Because I think about the people who find their way to stories like this one at strange hours of the night, when something is sitting on their chest and they can't name it yet. If that's you tonight, I see you. And I want to leave you with one question you can sit with. Have you ever been in a moment where keeping the peace meant losing yourself? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. If this story meant something to you, please subscribe. There are more stories here I believe you need to hear. Click on the video on your screen right now. You are going to want to know what happens next. This is a fictional story, inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Nashville, Tennessee to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is purely coincidental.